Dear friends, today through this webinar, we are going to look at uh, Dilexit Nos of Pope Francis, his encyclical last year, 2024, he published it. And we also have Dilexit of Pope Leo. So I'm going to look at this, both the documents in brief, but Dilexit as our focus. So we will be looking at the similarities between these documents, orientations, and contemporary relevance. Now, what is an apostolic exhortation or an encyclical? It's good that we understand it. An apostolic exhortation is a teaching document from the Pope, which oftentimes to exhort or encourage a particular virtue or activity. Like many papal encyclicals in the past, all the apostolic exhortations have often developed themes of the church's social teaching. So, Dilexit is not an exception. It is also talking about the social teachings, the focus of the church. And Dilexit Nos of Pope Francis last year focused on the Sacred Heart, the love of Christ. Dilexit, on the other hand, of Pope Leo, looking at call to love, care for the poor, the mission. Both these documents emphasize Christ's love as foundation of Christian life. There is a continuity in vision, love, mercy, renewal, social concern, etc. In fact, Dilexit Nos is a Latin phrase meaning he loved us. It is the title of Pope Francis's fourth encyclical letter, which focuses on the human and divine love of the heart of Jesus Christ. He has taken this particular word, he loved us, or a particular phrase, in fact, he loved us, taken from Romans chapter 8:37. And the focus of Pope Francis in this document was devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Why devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus? There are two reasons. One is we celebrate the year as 350th year of the apparitions of Sacred Heart to Saint Margaret Mary, Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque. That's one reason. The second reason is that today's world seems to have lost its heart. We see the continual strife, the war that is going on, the hatred that is meted out against people. That was touched by Pope Francis. And he says, we need to be in this heartless world, we need to be heart to the people, heart to the world. Church must be the heart of the world. We all must show the heart of Jesus to the world, a loving heart. And therefore, Christ's sacrificial love, he focused in this document. And it's also a call to reparation and deeper holiness, strengthening faith in times of social and moral turmoil. And it is an invitation for all of us to show trust in Christ's mercy. And Dilexit of Pope Leo means I have loved you, and echoes the title of Pope Francis's last encyclical letter, Dilexit Nos, on the devotion to the Sacred Heart. The title is taken from the words of Jesus in Revelation chapter 3, verses 9. And the exhortation is addressed to all Christians on love for the poor. The total length of the document is only 121 paragraphs. It's a small document, but profound in meaning. In the introduction, which is 3 paragraphs long, Pope Leo clarifies that this document is a companion to Pope Francis's final encyclical. It's a continuation. Dilexit Nos and Dilexit are actually born out of the same thinking. Pope Leo, he clarifies that Dilexit was drafted by Pope Francis, and that Pope Leo added some reflections to the draft, that's all. In fact, Pope Francis's worldview, the vision, has taken forward by Pope Leo. And what did he focus, or what is he focusing? He focuses on Jesus' unconditional love that sends us to the margins, to the periphery. And those who recall, the Society of Jesus has come out with its 4 universal preferences. And in that, one of them is walking with the marginalized, the poor, the migrants, the refugees, the weak, and so on. So that same idea is here in the Dilexit theme. And loving and caring for the poor as core gospel mandate for us. That is what Leo is focusing. And healing a wounded world through compassion. As I said, the Dilexit No also talks about that. The world lost its heart. The world seems to have lost its heart, Pope Francis says. A wounded world we are living in. Hatred, division, and even violence. So therefore, we as missionaries, missionary discipleship must be rooted in God's love. We must be able to love one another. We must be able to love everyone in this world. And therefore, we need to have a renewed ecclesial commitment to justice and fraternity. Church must commit it, once again, recommit ourselves to justice and fraternity. And the similarities, as I said, both this document has a lot of things in similar. Number one is centrality of Christ's love for humanity. Call to imitate Christ's self-giving love. An emphasis on compassion and mercy. Concern for the sufferings and marginalized. Invitation to personal and communal renewal. These are the similarities. And the orientations of these documents, both the documents, love is the foundation of Christian discipleship. If you take out love, there is no Christian discipleship. Devotion transforms mission. Encouragement to rebuild a society with gospel values. Focus on holiness expressed in concrete actions. Commitment to peace, justice, and service. These are the orientations of these documents. And if you look at Pope Francis, and there is a movement from Pope Francis to Pope Leo in the teachings of the church. Pope Francis, love of Christ as inner spiritual renewal. This is what he focused. Unless and until the personal conversion takes place, a personal transformation takes place, nothing is going to change. Therefore, he focused the first document through the Dilexit Nos. He focused on the love of Christ as inner spiritual renewal. And Pope Leo in Dilexit says, love of Christ as outward mission to the poor. Once we have the love of Christ inherent in us, innate in us, and then that has to move out. It has to be outward mission for the poor. Both of them are stressing healing, a spiritual healing, first document, and Leo's document, Pope Leo's document talks about a social healing. We all are social animals. We cannot live ourselves. We cannot work alone. We have to be collaborate and cooperate with all sorts of people. And therefore, we need to have a social conversion. Vision of the church as refuge for the weak and hope for the world. We must give hope to the hopeless world. We are living in a heartless world. And these documents tells us today, these documents both tell us today, return to the heart of Jesus. return to the heart of Jesus, the source of compassion, live love in action, and solidarity with the poor. These are very, very important. We need to rebuild human relationships broken by selfishness and inequality. Because we have seen this world, we have been seeing in this world there's so much of broken relationship. And if we break a relationship with one another, we are breaking relationship with God. And we break relationship with one another, we also breaking our relationship with oneself. And therefore, the world is becoming more and more selfish and inequality is flourishing. And that is where we Christians must show to the world there is a world possible of relationship, of selflessness and equality. And we are supposed to be instruments of mercy in our communities, in the larger community, wherever we are living. Mercifulness is God's grace. And therefore, we need to also focus on the church must be simple. Church, renew the church through simplicity, humility, and love. This is what both these documents are telling us. And I can show you some of the fantastic depictions of this summary of this document has come from Rome. I'll just share these things with you so that you can have a look at now on the screen. I'll put it on the screen for you. See, these are prepared by the dicastery for promoting integral human development. They have brought the summary in a picturesque form. I have loved you. Revelation chapter 3:9, I told you from there. Just to have a look at the screen. It's a summary, how it all came about and how there is a flow and of theme. The love of Christ called to draw near to the poor. If I say I have love of Christ is there in me, then I should love the poor. That is a summary. And look at why this document has come, etc. is shown very well. And you see the second part of it, chapter 8 to chapter 2 and chapter 3, it is mentioned about this. What does the tradition of the church teach us until today? We are not talking something in the air. We are not talking something which is rootless. There is a root in the church. Our tradition tells us that we are for the poor. And therefore, the scriptures, so many scripture passages have been quoted in chapter 2 by Pope Leo, and the Old Testament and New Testament, etc. So you can have a look at this. And the traditions also, care of the sick and monastic life and radical separation, feeling, with the poor, the prisoners and so on. So we worked for that in the church so far, and we need to continue with this. And that's why Pope Francis mentioned, Pope Leo, in fact, Pope Francis and Leo both mentioned many saints. And this is the third part of it. The third part of the chapter 4 and 5, it again talks about the parable of the Good Samaritan, which is a way for us as Christians. We must have love for the poor. And that's our teaching. And we have also the tradition, the encyclicals of Pope John Paul II, Benedict XVI, and Pope Francis. All these are actually, there is a flow. It's moving from one to the other very, very seamlessly. And therefore, Dilexit, walking the path of love for the poor. I have loved you is a profound invitation to live out Christ's love through the care for the poor, caring the poor, we can say. And chose this day, as Pope Francis also chose this day of Pope Francis of Assisi's birthday, feast day, as the release of these documents. And if you look at chapter wise, I just briefly mentioned about the chapter. If Dilexit chapter 1, it talks about the inseparable link between love for God and love for the poor. You remember the Bible says love of God and love of the poor, or for the poor, love for the poor. This first chapter emphasizes that love for the Lord is intrinsically connected to the love for the poor. It highlights the cry of the poor as a challenge to all humanity and the church, stressing the need for a change in mentality to love beyond the throwaway culture, the consumerist world, and acknowledge the multiple forms of modern poverty. In chapter 2, it talks about God's preferential option for the poor. Drawing heavily from scripture, Pope Leo explains that God has a special place in his heart for the marginalized and the oppressed. Jesus' love, Jesus himself became poor to share the human condition, making concern for the poor a fundamental criterion for Christian life and the authentic way of encountering Christ. And chapter 3 talks about the church's vocation as a poor church for the poor. The historical witness of saints, many saints' names have been mentioned here, including our own Saint Teresa of Calcutta. And these saints' life demonstrate that serving the poor is central to the church's mission. This chapter asserts that practical action for the needy is a requirement of true worship, not an optional activity. It is not a negotiable activity. It is non-negotiable for a church. And the chapter 4 talks about addressing the structural injustice and promoting integral development. Development has to be integral. This section focuses on the social dimension of charity, calling for action against the structures of sin and a dictatorship of an economy that kills. It discriminates. It advocates for both charitable action and social transformation, such as supporting decent work, promoting just policies, and ensuring the right to education for the poor. And chapter 5, beautiful chapter, conclusion. It says a call to personal and communal conversion. All of us need to have a transformation, a conversion. The final chapter urges every Christian to have constantly and a daily commitment to care for the poor. It emphasizes that the poor are not a problem, but teachers of the gospel who can evangelize the faithful through their experience. Concrete gestures of closeness and welcome are presented as the true expression of the gospel of the world. My dear brothers and sisters, in that context, when we look at these readings, it is so important for us to understand the minds of these great popes, and especially Pope Leo here. He concludes Dilexit with a section of 7 paragraphs about alms giving. You find it from 115 to 121. The individual Christian is called to serve the poor as Christ himself did. Seeing in the poor a human person created by God, bearing a heart that called to love God and fellow human beings, and invited to share the Father's eternal banquet. It's a beautiful way of concluding. And let me tell you that Pope Francis does not stop it here. He says it's important for us to draw focus on love for the poor. It is significant that Pope Leo should publish this exhortation, the continuity with the Pope Francis, Dilexit Nos. And both these documents, if you just post, if you look at each other and keeping together and read it, you get a better idea about the minds of the church and the Pope. Now, people may ask why this document has been released at this time. Pope Francis says this. Pope Leo tells us that with the release of this first book on this day, he developed thoughts of the Christian life for the first time, both in humble continuity with Pope Francis and with his own particular style and experience. Pope Francis completed this exhortation that started by Pope Benedict XVI and Lumen Fidei. Pope Leo XIV now completes the work Pope Francis has started before his death. And that is the one significant. And as I said, the key messages of this document is that love for the poor. God's love. If you love God, and God's love means love for the poor. And therefore, we cannot accept social exclusion, personal fragility, lack of voice and rights are forms of poverty, and such poverty cannot be accepted. We are reminded that Christ himself became poor, and therefore a Christian must be poor. What is the preferential option for the poor? The preferential option for the poor is a key theme of Catholic social teaching, reminding us that those who are experiencing poverty are given special attention in God's eyes. We are therefore called to put the needs of the marginalized and vulnerable first. If you look at the paragraph number 16, Pope Leo says, never indicates exclusivity or discrimination towards other groups which would be impossible for God. Wanting to inaugurate a kingdom of justice, fraternity, and solidarity, God has a special place in his heart for those who are discriminated against. And he asks us, his church, to make a decisive and radical choice in favor of the weaker sections of the society. And what does Dilexit say? Dilexit says about welcoming migrants. It's a very important point. Today we are living in a world of migrants. There are two types of migrants: voluntary migrants, yes, and forced migration. And today we have to look at the forced migration. The experience of migration accompanies the history of the people of God. Pope Leo emphasizes, quoting by biblical examples of Abraham, Moses, and the Holy Family in their flight to Egypt, and Christ himself in coming to live among us. Therefore, migration must be our concern. And Dilexit makes clear that welcoming migrants is therefore a crucial part of the church's mission. You know, this was very, very dear to Pope Francis too. In number 75 of the paragraph, number 75 of Dilexit, he writes, the church, like a mother, accompanies those who are walking. Where the world sees threats, she sees children. Where walls are built, the church sees bridges. She knows that her proclamation of the gospel is credible only when it is translated into gestures of closeness and welcome. And she knows that in every rejected migrant, it is Christ himself who knocks at the door of the community. And when we look at this document, what does it mean to us today in India? Perhaps we can look at contemporary relevance of this in India, in Indian situation. I think Dilexit, or I have loved you, the pastoral letter rooted in the mission of Jesus and the church's preferential love for the poor, speaks with urgent power into the Indian context today. India, with its vibrant faith traditions, is also marred by deep caste hierarchies, widening class divisions, chronic unemployment, gender injustice, and persistent discrimination. In such a context, Dilexit is not simply a document. It's a prophetic summon for all of us, a call. And therefore, what we need to do, number one, reclaiming Jesus' radical love for the poor. I think church has deviated quite a lot from loving the poor and the loving the weak. And therefore, Indian society still pushes entire communities, Dalits, Adivasis, migrant laborers, domestic workers, manual scavengers into a structural invisibility. And therefore, Dilexit reminds Indian Catholics or Indian Church the poor is not objects of charity, they are subjects of God's special love. The church must love, church must move from pity to solidarity, from doing for being with. Love becomes real when it confronts the forces that produces poverty. And this calls Indian church or Indian Catholics to do some concrete steps in life. That is, stand publicly with those denied dignity. Reject caste-based practices even subtly present within the church communities. Embrace a church, according to the Pope's language, Pope Francis' language, a church that smells of the sheep. We have to be part of the people. And the second point we can take it is a challenge to caste discrimination within the church. It is shame that in many places still casteism exists within the church too, at least in practice. We see these things existing in some parts. And therefore, we need to rethink about parish seating and burial traditions, marriage arrangements, leadership and representation, institutional and employment patterns, etc. And Dilexit challenges us to recognize caste as a sin that contradicts the gospel, heals the wounds caused by discrimination within the Christian communities. We need to build structures where Dalit, tribal, migrant, and poor Catholics are agents, not recipients of church processes. The third important thing we can look at is a preferential option for the poor in a consumerist India. India's rapid economic growth has widened the gap between the wealthy elite, the working poor, the unemployed young, the landless and displaced people. And therefore, Dilexit pushes us as Indian Catholics to move from charity to justice, not just donating, but questioning why poverty exists. Advocating for policies supporting education, employment, fair wages, and land rights. And make our parishes centers of social transformation. An integral development has to take place. Skill training for unemployed youth, counseling and support for migrants, economic empowerment programs, collaboration with the civil society movements, etc., can be taken up. And the fourth point is loving the marginalized as a spiritual disciple. As a spiritual disciple of Jesus. Dilexit teaches that love for the poor is not optional. It is non-negotiable. It is part of our holiness. Therefore, we Catholics or Christians in India, it means that experiencing God in the struggles of the oppressed, understanding social justice as an expression of spiritual life, recognizing that prayer and action must go hand in hand. This resonates deeply with Indian spiritual traditions, where the divine is found in service. We cannot have a compartmentalization of our spirituality and our action, our apostolate, our mission. And the fifth point is building a synodal and listening church. Pope Francis's focus was building a synodal church, a reformed church. And therefore, Leo also focuses, and we need to take up this to the next step. That is the marginalized group in India, marginalized groups in India, including women, domestic workers, youth, migrants, minorities, often feel unheard. The Dilexit invites the church to Listen to those at the periphery. Involve them in leadership and decision making. Create safe spaces for dialogue and discernment. This is in line with Pope Francis's call for a synodal church, where walking together includes those society abandons. The people who are neglected, segregated, sidelined, marginalized people should be our focus, because they are children of God. And the sixth point we can look at is responding to unemployment and youth despair. I think millions of Indian youth experience joblessness, anxiety, depression, migration stress, technological displacement, etc. And here, Dilexit encourages the church to invest in education and to empower people. Create vocational training centers. Promote entrepreneurship among the poor. Accompany young people spiritually and psychologically. To love the poor is also to protect their future. And we are called to be prophetic witnesses. That's the seventh point. In a society normalizing hate, caste violence, discrimination, economic injustice, and indifference, Dilexi calls the Indian church to prophetic witness. Speak even when it is uncomfortable. Defend those who have no voice. Be voice of the voiceless. Collaborate with movements upholding human dignity. Resist systems that exploit people and the environment. This is the missionary disciples of Pope Francis also spoke, and Leo now emphasizes. So the conclusion is, in loving the poor, we love Christ. In the Indian reality, wounded by various discrimination, marginalization, and structural inequality, Dilexit is a voice of hope and a mental for us, a courage. And it's a manual for discipleship. He tells Indian Catholics to increase our faith that's credible. And that is credible only when it embraces the poor, when it becomes the voice of the voiceless people. To love Christ means to love the poor. Transformation of society begins with the transformation of our hearts and structures. Discipleship is measured by our closeness to the least, the last, and the lost. Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, the Dilexit is not merely a pastoral document. It's a revolution of compassion, a call to rebuild India and the world from the margins. And it's a reminder that justice is the deepest form of love. Let us commit to our faith and make a resolution that we will be truly Christian Following these teachings of our church. And these exhortations, in fact, encourage us. Dilexit and Dilexit Nos encourage us to become truly the disciples of Christ in our context. Thank you, and God bless you all.